Welcome to Total Spectrum Spotlight, an informative look and an insightful discussion of today's legislative issues and political trends.
Hello, and welcome to Total Spectrum Spotlight, where we bring you short interviews with both newsmakers and news shapers. Hi, I'm Steve Gordon, the managing partner of Total Spectrum. We want to look ahead today and think about the first 90 days of a Biden administration. Here to give us their thoughts and perspectives are two people that are very well connected in Washington. Former Congressman Erik Paulsen, a Republican, and Patrick Robertson, a Democrat, both Total Spectrum strategic consultants. Erik and Patrick, thanks so very much for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Glad to see everybody's face.
Patrick, you're a former assistant chief of staff for a U.S. Senator, very well connected to Democratic leadership. What do you sense the Biden administration's agenda will be in the first 90 or 100 days in Congress, in the agencies, and with executive orders?
Sure, Steve. I think had we had this conversation a year ago, I would have thought there would have been a long wish list of items from potentially repealing some of the 2017 tax law to making major changes in immigration policy to pushing a new healthcare system or at least changes to the Affordable Care Act. But all of those sort of larger items are now going to take a back seat to the most important thing on any of our minds, which is pandemic response and management. You've seen the Biden team as they rolled out their cabinet secretaries and their sub-agency nominees focus first and foremost on the health agencies and on what they want to do. I think you've seen President-elect Biden say he's going to ask folks to wear a mask for the first 100 days of his presidency, and he's hoping to inoculate or vaccinate 100 million people in those 100 days. And so the public face of the Biden administration and transition has really been about pandemic response. That being said, the other agencies aren't going to do nothing. They're not going to sit around and not work. I think you'll see a lot of action at the agency level at reviewing recently instituted rules, as well as looking at repealing rules or changing rules from the Trump administration that they didn't like. That's harder to do, right? I mean, undoing rules is much harder. And then in Congress, I think you need to look at a couple of things. There's still a runoff election in Georgia that's going to determine control of the Senate. And there's the question about whether the Senate and the House and the current president come together on COVID relief. I think the Biden administration or the Biden transition has been clear that it wants to do some sort of economic package, whether that's couched as COVID relief or infrastructure spending in the early part of the new term. And that's something that needs to happen. But the one thing I do want to say about the Senate really quickly is regardless of whether both of those races are won by Democrats or both by Republicans, or frankly, they split one each, which I think is the least likely scenario. I think the Senate is going to be a place where everything moderates and where deals are made. And so regardless of who controls it, the margin is going to be very, very slim. And that's going to keep sort of the ambitions of both sides in check going forward.
Thank you, Patrick. Erik, let me ask you the same question. As a former member of Congress, what's your perspective on what the Biden administration's agenda will be in the first 90 to 100 days in Congress, in the agencies, and via executive orders?
Well, sure, Steve. And just to follow up on what Patrick had said, you've got not only a new president coming in, but obviously a new Congress with a narrower House majority, likely control for Republicans in the Senate, but that is dependent on the January 5th races that are coming up. And with the divided split control of Congress, I think President-elect Biden now will be focusing on what he can do as the executive, which means executive orders, as Patrick had mentioned, and conducting a lot of that activity right at the cabinet level. Every president, from President Obama to President Trump, has increasingly used executive orders to get around the legislative gridlock that has occurred. And so first, I think you're going to see a rollback of some of President Trump's executive orders that he actually had implemented. It could be on energy or immigration, which means looser immigration constraints coming from the new Biden administration, extending DACA, for instance, but still no long-term immigration solution without Congress's involvement. You're going to probably see an increased focus on climate issues, rejoining the Paris Accords, for instance. And you're probably in the area of higher education, could see some extension of student loan forgiveness. You'll probably see some police reforms implemented by executive order. And on the international front, I think it's important to note you're probably going to see enhanced cooperation with Europe and still being tough on China without all the bluster and possibly even removing some of the tariffs that are in place. But returning to executive orders from the Obama era is also probably something that we will see, particularly around labor issues with the fiduciary rule or the joint employer standard, as well as a focus on some consumer protection issues pending the nomination for the CFPB that President Biden will bring forward. But as Patrick had mentioned, the reality is front and center, the top issue is going to be the pandemic and COVID relief, and managing COVID and distributing vaccines is going to be front and center for 90 to 100 days, clearly. And I think the President Biden will be proposing a very large stimulus, but a lot of that is pending a moderated outcome from the Senate, as well as if the COVID package comes together still in December prior to the new administration.
Patrick and Erik, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
And thank you all for watching. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, stay well, and we look forward to being with you next year for the next Total Spectrum Spotlight.
Thank you for watching Total Spectrum Spotlight. For more information about Total Spectrum, please visit us at totalspectrumsga.com. Total Spectrum, strategies uniquely focused on your success.